You see me there? Okay. A wave to anybody who's watching live. So we begin page, on the text, page 14. We begin to read the Torah again. So yesterday in the shul we read the beginning, the first book of Bereshis, first book of Genesis. It's about the creation. And all the ways at the end of the Parsha, the Torah tells us that Hashem was not very pleased with the behavior of the people. People were not behaving properly, and he started to rethink, so to speak, the model of creation, and he said, I'm going to wipe out humanity. So there was one individual who, together with his family, was a paradigm of virtue. That was Noach. Noach, as his name is, Noach means comfort. And Noach, the last words of yesterday's portion were, Noach matzah chen be'einei Hashem. Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. And this week's portion, which we're going to be dealing with, follows on from the Noach matzah chen be'einei Hashem, and says, Eile toldot Noach. We're going to tell you a little bit about the story, the family of Noach. And the portion begins that Noach was a righteous man, ish tzaddik, and therefore Hashem said, although I want to wipe out the human race almost in its entirety, but I do want to retain a sapling from which to rebuild humanity after they are decimated, and that will be you, Noach. And God gave Noach 120 years to build an ark, and he instructed him not to delegate, but to build it himself. That's why it took so long. And the purpose was to give humanity a chance to be told by Noach about the impending danger, and to take matters into their hands and to change their behavior, and thus to avert the plan that God had in store for them. For we know that when it comes to a negative decree, there always is the option of prayer and of rectifying one's deeds. So that although Hashem had said that there would be a tragedy coming, if the people were to change themselves, that could still be averted.
And he gave him 120 years. I just wanted to get that right. I never heard that before.
120 years in which to build the ark. So there was, taking into account that the years then, obviously, if the average lifespan before Noach was close to 1,000, so people gave, Noach had his 3 children after he was 500. So you can understand, at that time, before Sinai, the age of being responsible fully for punishment was 100. So it seems that the age of maturity and the outlook to life, time during life, was different. I guess that we approach time within the perspective of we have 80, anywhere from 60 to 100 years. I guess the average person assumes that he will live. Difficult to know how much he assumes he will live. Some people die very young, unfortunately. Some people die much older. One of the people we recently buried told me I outlived my life expectation. My pension didn't last as my savings. I didn't expect to live so long. So, but the average person, I think, today expects, hopefully, to live anywhere between 70 to 90 years, let's say. So, based on that, we treat time, I would assume, based on that graph. If you expect to live, average life expectancy is about 800-900 years. So probably marking the birthday wouldn't be, maybe you'd mark every 10 years or every 50 years, and so on. So I guess it's probably, but at any rate, yes.
And the bar mitzvah at 13 then was a reflection of the shorter lifespan.
Yes, bar mitzvah at 13, we talk about the age of being fully responsible.
Yes, exactly.
As the age of 100, which in the equivalent today is actually 20. We say that after Sinai, the age of being able to be punished, not the age of responsibility, but there's from 13 to 20 is an age that's one is responsible for one's deeds, but the age of punishment, just be careful of all the wires. the age of punishment is actually 100. The age of punishment today is 20. Interesting that for a child to be able to sell his ancestral lands, you also have to be 20. So while 13 and 12 is the age of responsibility, there's still an important milestone at 20, either to be able to be actually punished by a court of law, or to actually be able to sell lands inherited, properties inherited. We assume that till then a person doesn't have full maturity. So 20 is the equivalent of 20 back then was 100. So, at any rate, so Noach is in his flood, in his ark that he built. He was instructed to take in animals, all the birds. The only thing he didn't have to take in was fish. The fish were in their natural habitat in the flood. So now we get to text 1. What happened towards the end of the flood? And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noach opened the window of the ark that he had made. And he sent forth the raven, right, the orev kind of bird, and it went out back and forth until the waters dried up off the earth. And he sent forth the dove from with him, the Yonah, to see whether the waters had abated from upon the surface of the earth. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of its foot. So it returned to him to the ark, because there was water upon the entire surface of the earth. So he stretched forth his hand and took it, and he brought it to him to the ark. And he waited again another 7 days, and he again sent forth the dove from the ark. And the dove returned to him in the evening, and behold, it had plucked an olive leaf in its mouth. So Noach knew that the water had abated from upon the earth. If there's an olive leaf growing somewhere, that means the trees are not covered totally with water anymore. And again he waited 7 days, and he sent forth the dove, and it no longer continued to return to him. And he understood that the dove had already found a place to reside. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, that the waters dried up from upon the earth, and Noach removed the covering of the ark, and he saw, and behold, the surface of the ground had dried up. And in the second month, on this 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. Okay. So what we are going to investigate and think about and discuss today are these two birds, the raven and the dove. We have here a question, text 2. Think about it. Why did Noach choose specifically these birds, the raven and the dove? Are there no birds that fly better than them? Or we're going to find that there's symbolism. And furthermore, how did Noach have permission to let these two birds out of the ark before the time came for everybody else to leave? Why was he sending those birds out? So let's understand what's going on here with these birds. So have you ever heard about carrier pigeons? Right? Carrier pigeons used to do the mail. So doves and pigeons are the same family, right? Actually, maybe it's even interchangeable, doves and pigeons. I'm not sure. Pigeon?
The birds.
Yonah. Torah. The Torah, then Yonah. Pigeons, doves, they're the same family. So carrier pigeons would be a very natural, if you had access to them, that would be a natural choice to send out to relay messages. So let's think about it in that perspective. So let's see text 4. I would suggest, this is from Rabbi Berlin, he said, I would suggest that this raven and dove were not among the pairs brought into the ark upon God's command for the purpose of breeding offspring. Rather, before the flood, Noach was a nobleman, and the custom then was for noblemen to raise ravens and doves. These birds entered the ark as part of Noach's household. He was told to bring in his household. Homegrown ravens are not sent far, but doves are used to traveling long distances to carry letters and bring back various objects in its mouth. Thus, when Noach sent the raven, and it saw only water, it stayed put rather than travel far. So he sent the dove who was used to flying on faraway missions. But okay, that's an interesting explanation. I've never heard it before till I saw it in this class. But let us also investigate what meaning do these two birds have. And we'll find something very interesting. They're actually at odds with each other. They're actually opposites of each other. Because we talk about the raven. We even find this in general literature. The raven is considered a heartless bird. It doesn't care about its offspring. And we'll soon bring some text backing that up. But even not in our Torah text, even in general literature in society, you will find the raven is not portrayed as a loving bird.
The opposite of that.
The opposite.
Because the dove stays with one partner.
The dove is considered a loving kind of symbol. We know today we have the dovish policies. We talk about political policies that are dovish, like doves. It means they are peaceful.
Carrying of peace.
Right. You will have very often peace movements, or they think they're peace movements. Some of them are not so peaceful. They will have a picture of a dove with an olive branch. And we'll see later the Medrash says there are some very important components and attributes about the dove, which is why the Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, are compared in the scriptures to a dove. So there's got to be meaning here. First he sends the raven, who's the heartless creature, and then he sends the dove. So let's look at something interesting. Let's look at what it says in our sources of Torah about the raven. So it's something we say in prayer every day. It's from Psalms 147, text 5a. It says, he gives the animal its food, talking about God, to the young ravens that call out. Why does God have to feed the young ravens? Who usually feeds young chicks, young infants? The mother, the father. There should be some kind of responsibility of the parents. So here the Medrash says as follows. How do we know that a raven is cruel to its children? Well, the verse states, he prepares for the raven his prey when his young cry out to God. Furthermore, the verse states, to the young ravens that call out. So where are the parents? And the Medrash explains, when a raven mothers children, the male says to the mother that perhaps some other bird is the father, suspicious of his spouse, and rejects the children and abandons them. So basically the father is absconded with some kind of a lame excuse that maybe the children are not his children. He rejects them, so what does God do? God provides for all his creatures, also for the young ravens that are abandoned. Says the Medrash, what does God do? He brings forth mosquitoes from their waste from them to eat and develop. Actually, that's parenthetically, maybe when we have the mosquitoes disturbing us here, we can think that at least maybe they'll get to the creatures that eat them. So they'll be doing something good. But
Geckos.
When the geckos eat the mosquitoes, so we need to import some more geckos in because we have a lot of mosquitoes.
Yeah, actually.
Okay, so that's one thing about ravens. They're portrayed rather negatively in our writings because they are not faithful to their children. Then we have what the Talmud says in the Masechet Sanhedrin, which is that even in the ark, they really were not acting properly. We know that there is a rule when the world is going through a tremendous suffering, whether it be a national famine or whether it be some other national kind of epidemic, there is a prohibition against being intimate, spouses being intimate. And that is because if the whole world around you is suffering, it's not a time to be engaged in activities that are joyous. Unless the person has not yet fulfilled the obligation of procreation. But other than that, are we online? Alive? Other than that, one is not, for example, in the situation where the world is being destroyed by a flood, it's inappropriate to have marital relations, which is why it says that Noach left the ark. It says he left with his family and their wives, and the language used is a language that we understand that they had been basically celibate. They had to be separated from each other when they were in the ark, because if the world is suffering, it's inappropriate to have joyous connection. And when spouses are intimate, that is obviously an act of joy. So, the entire animal life also refrained from being intimate, taking the lesson from Noach and his family. There were only 3 that didn't stick to that. Listen to this, text number 6. The rabbis have taught, there were 3 who cohabited in the ark, and each of them was stricken. The dog, the raven, and Ham. Ham, the youngest son of, I don't know that he was the youngest son, but the son of Noach, who later gets into trouble by exposing the vulnerability, the nakedness of Noach. He already was misbehaving in the ark, and he engaged in cohabitation with his wife. The dog, the raven, and Ham. This is, in other words, the fact when you can not be sensitive to the fact that the world around you is being destroyed. This is not a time to engage in your own personal pleasure. This was a lesson lost on Ham, who we later see to be an irresponsible young Urkin. And obviously that the raven was also not of that the caliber of mercy to be able to feel the pain of the world. And we have here a story that's inserted, an interesting story from the Arizal. Once went with his colleagues to pray at the tomb of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, one of the rabbis of the Talmudic time. As they neared the tomb, a raven flew near and perched on a branch in front of the Arizal. Arizal being Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, who lived 400 years ago, a great Kabbalistic sage. But he called out several times to the Arizal. The Arizal said, this raven is a reincarnation of a certain wicked tax collector who is very cruel to the poor. His soul is being punished for his cruel behavior towards the poor, for snatching their clothing and property, and now he is begging me to pray for him. In other words, the reincarnation is into a raven. The raven is also cruel. He was cruel and he got reincarnated into a raven. There's a lot of, that opens up a discussion into itself about reincarnation, but we'll leave it as that. We're just trying to bring out that the raven has a certain cruel aspect. We'll speak to it. On the contrast, we talk about doves. So we have in text 7a the quote from the Song of Songs of Shlomo HaMelech Shir Hashirim, where we, the Jewish people, are compared to a dove. Inach yafa rayati, inach yafa inayich yonim. Behold, you are comely, my beloved. You are beautiful. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are like doves. What's so beautiful about doves? Let's see what the Medrash says. You'll see some beautiful words about doves in text 7b. Just as a dove is wholesome, Israel is pleasant in their way when they travel to Jerusalem for the 3 holidays. Just as a dove excels, Israel excels. Just as a dove is modest, Israel is modest. Just as a dove is faithful to its spouse, Israel is faithful to God. Just as a dove doesn't abandon its nest, even if its chicks are taken from it, so too the Jewish people, through their temple, though their temple is destroyed, they don't abandon the 3 festivals. Just as a dove hatches new offspring each month, the Jewish people renew each month Torah, mitzvot, and good deeds. Just as a dove travels great distances and returns to its nest, so too the Jewish people. Just as a dove brought light to the world, the Jewish people bring light to the world, as it is written, and nations shall go by your light. Now, when did a dove bring light to the world? In the days of Noach. And is it written, and the dove returned to him in the evening, and behold, it had plucked an olive leaf in its mouth. That brought light to the world. First of all, because it told the world that the land was becoming inhabitable. And probably there's also symbolism in the fact that it's an olive leaf. With an olive you make oil. With oil you kindle light. So I believe that's also what is meant here in the verse. So now let's think about this. What happens with a dove? The greatest tribute you can say actually to a dove and a pigeon is that they're offered on the altar as a sacrifice. Text 8, quoting from the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, and if his sacrifice to God is a burnt offering from birds, he shall bring it from turtle doves or from young doves. We translate it sometimes as pigeons. So the doves are actually used as part of the service on the altar, which gives them the final seal of approval that they are good creatures that symbolize good things. Now let's hear a very interesting take on this sending of the raven. So we said that the raven, it was not good. It violated the rules of the ark and it had relations with its mate. We say that in general the raven is not faithful. The raven, even in order to get out of its obligation of feeding its kids, the raven will question whether the kids are its own. Not a very good paradigm of somebody you would like to send out right after a flood to check out the scene for you. So why does Noah send the raven? What is he thinking? So we'll see here an interesting take on this. Text 9 here. Our sages of blessed memory have said that the raven encircled the ark and did not go to fulfill its errand. Why didn't it go? Noah said, go and see if there's life. You know why? Because it suspected Noah concerning its mate, etc. It said, if I go away, maybe Noah will have some intimacy with Mrs. Raven. And so, being a suspicious type, said, I'm not going out there into the wild yonder in order to leave my mate at the mercies of Noah. Now just remember that Noah had saved them all. He was the one who had, he had been the one that fed them, working ceaselessly for their benefit, feeding them, and tending to them, even suffering from the kind of efforts he invested in them. So here, the raven to go and suspect Noah wanting to act improperly with Mrs. Raven is really shows you what kind of a mind the raven has. So then, this commentary asks, why from all species did Noah choose to send the raven? Didn't he know that the raven was wicked from the fact that it cohabited in the ark? How could Noah expect to hear good news from such a creature? Doesn't the verse state? Verse states that a good person heralds good tidings. Ish tov v'aser tov. If you want to hear good news, ask somebody who's good. Not a wicked person. You see that sometimes. You go and ask somebody who's good. From a good person, you'll hear good news. You can't expect to hear from a wicked person, you can't expect to hear good news. Why is that? Hashem passes goodness through good people. Why would he want to send you a piece of good news through some wicked person? So why are you sending the wicked species, the raven? And here, this rabbi, the author of a book called the Mayim Chaim, he suggests the following, which is very innovative. I would suggest, he says in text 9b, that Noah did not send the raven on a mission to tell him if the earth had dried up. He wouldn't have sent somebody negative. Proof of this is the fact that while regarding the dove, the verse states, he sent the dove to see if the waters had abated from upon the surface of the earth. Here the verse writes nothing of the sort. Just that he sent forth the raven and it went out back and forth. It doesn't say why he sent him out. Rather, and here this is a very innovative thought, rather the intention was this. The intention was, let's skip one paragraph here and jump to the next paragraph. Noah was particularly righteous, for he sustained and fed all the animals in the ark for 12 months at great personal cost, to the point that he was groaning and splitting blood, that's a quote from Rashi, from their burden. Because the animal, the lion was once upset that he came late, and he hit him, and therefore he had blood. Imagine, they were there for a whole year. One day he came late to the lion, instead of the lion being understanding and saying thank you, he gave him a scratch, gave him a hit. Noach kept on righteously sustaining all the animals. That's the ultimate of good. It was the ultimate paradigm of kindness, of virtue. So Noach could not tolerate such a cruel creature, and he did not want to live in close quarters with the root of evil. So he sent off the raven, banishing it so he would no longer have to be together with it. By Yishalach, he sent him out of there. Get them out of here. You know what he would say? I don't want to see you. An innovative interpretation. Actually, the word orev in the previous paragraph, he goes with the Hebrew of ayin, vav, reish, beit, orev, which is raven, can also have the same letters as evra, which means anger. Also, orev, if you spell it out fully, has the same letters as bo, ra, in him is wickedness. Or if you write it without the vav, it has the same letters as with evil, bara. So you see, it has all the letters of negativity. So Noach sent him, be gone with you. And interesting, why would you send out the negativity before you try and find out the positivity? Look at Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, a great Hasidic scholar, wrote, therefore Noach sent the raven and then the dove, just as Esav preceded Yaakov in birth. For the peel always grows before the fruit. When you see a fruit growing, what grows first? The peel, and then the fruit grows within it. This is a lesson in life. Lesson in life is that sometimes, very often, positivity is preceded by negativity. Challenge precedes growth. So when somebody is looking for success and he's met with the opposite, he's met with challenge, he should be heartened. He should know that sometimes the challenge, the peel, grows before the fruit. And he has to overcome that challenge, and then the fruit, then the positive thing, then the success will come. That's what we pray always for ourselves every morning is, Al Tiviyeni L'Deni Sayon. We pray to God not to bring us to a test. And if we do face a test, we know it's in order to elevate us to a higher space, not to, God forbid, make us fall. Now, what we're going to do now is, okay, so we've explained, according to these novel interpretations, what's going on here with the raven or with the dove. The raven is indeed a cruel, heartless creature, but why we're sending him off first is maybe because we just want to get him out of the ark. The pigeon is being sent, perhaps, we gave a thought, perhaps it's like the carrier pigeons want to get messages. So we sent a pigeon because he'll go far and bring back a message, which indeed he did. But now we would like to give some meaning into what this means to us more on an emotional, psychological level. So let's first understand that generally speaking, in life, we have two modes. There are two modes that we engage in, generally. One is permissiveness, giving, providing, shining, illuminating, sharing. And one is strictness, withholding, guiding, limiting, disciplining. Those are two general modes that we have, to give and then to control. And different people have different versions of that. Some people are more the giving kind, some people are more the disciplined kind. Very often in a family, in the unit of a husband and a wife, very often there will be a dynamic where one is more the disciplinarian in the family, one is more the nurturer, one is more the giver. There's various roles, but we all have those aspects within us. The question is, what are the overarching? What is our personality colored by? The giving part or the controlling or restrictive part? And let's see how this applies in mitzvahs. Okay, let's see how this applies in mitzvahs. For example, we're going to say the mitzvah of giving. Well, somebody who's a person of total kindness would maybe just want to give unlimited. Whereas the Torah comes and says there's a limit. One shouldn't give more than 20% of one's earnings, because then you may need to take charity yourself. And I'm not sure if some of the tycoons of today have that limitation. I think Warren Buffett said famously, after he gave the giving pledge of giving 99% of his wealth away to charity, that his children will still not have an issue. I want to check that it's the center. He said that his children will still not have an issue of buying whatever they want during their lifetimes with the 1% he kept for them. So perhaps not about that did the sages say you can't give more than 20%. We're talking about, I guess, a regular kind of income. More than 20% may lead a person to poverty, and then he'll have to take charity himself, and that wouldn't be the point. But that's coming from the strictness, the restrictive aspect, the gevura as we call it. So let's see this a little bit inside. Now, as regards to the totality of the 10 sephirot, it's the 10 spheres, Kabbalistic spheres, as they are in the soul of man, it is known to all that the attributes are generally divided into 7 emotive attributes, which are called midot. And all the specific traits in man derive from one of these 7 attributes. These attributes are the root of all the traits. They are the attribute of chesed, to share without limit, and the attribute of gevura, to withhold for sharing so much or from sharing altogether. Those are the 2 general modes, the giving and the restraining, the sharing, the withholding. So let's look at text 12, how it plays out in personality types, the way they serve God. Among divine servants, there are 2 degrees and levels that, depending on the root of their souls above, are distinct in relation to the categories of the right and left, right being kindness, left being strictness. That is, the characteristic of the left is the trait of contraction, tzimtzum, and concealment. From this attribute derives also the aspect of contraction and limitation in divine service. For example, with charity, that one should not expend more than 1/5. So that is a strict, that is a limitation within the mitzvah. And likewise, as regards the study of Torah and other commandments, he makes do with discharging his duty, the definite duty to which the Torah obliges him. For example, if somebody has less time, he has a definite obligation to study Torah in the morning for a few minutes and at night for a few minutes. But that is just doing exactly what he needs to do. That's coming from the concept of gevura, of concealment, of limitation. By contrast, when we talk about a person who's coming from the perspective of chesed, kindness, the characteristic of the right is the attribute of grace, chesed, and extension in divine service by way of expansion, without any contraction and concealment whatsoever. There is no restraint to the spirit of his generosity, whether it be with respect to charity, the study of Torah, or other commandments. He does not suffice in discharging his obligation only, but to the extent of never sufficient. He constantly wants to give, he constantly wants to be giving forth. So there's 2 general modes. Now let's think about this. Let's try and analyze the flood from a perspective of where did the flood come from? It was brought about by the behavior of the people. The behavior of the people that led to the flood, was that a behavior that stemmed from permissiveness, from chesed, or from constraint, from discipline? Many. I ask you to fill this plain hot water. Just hot water, just hot water. Just hot water. Thank you. As you can hear, my voice is still Simchas Torah. So the flood was arrived at. The behavior of the people was it a chesed? Was it coming from the mode of giving, expansiveness, permissiveness, limitlessness, no boundaries, or was it coming from a perspective of discipline and boundaries and concealment and so on? What would you say? Well, let's think what they were doing. The things that people were doing, the things that people were doing were basically a lack of boundaries. Wasn't it? There was, what was the sin that led to the flood? People living together without, people living with other species, with other people's spouses, and all kinds. There were no boundaries in the terms of relationships that they had, in terms of even relations of intimacy, so to speak. There were no boundaries. People took each other's wives. People had relations with other species. You say even the animals were no longer taking the cue from humanity, weren't faithful to their own species. There was interbreeding that naturally came about within, either because they took the cue from man, or because there's this kind of an energy, or that somehow also is there, and therefore it says that all flesh became decrepit. All flesh referring not just to all mankind, but even the animals. That's why the animals have to be wiped out as well, except for those select few that God chose by hand that were kosher and that retained their integrity, and they were saved. 2 of each, male and female of each species of the non-kosher species, and 7 of each of the kosher species. So it was not from restraint, or from the contrary. It was a permissive generation. But that permissiveness led that people felt comfortable taking each other's money. And so there was no feeling of boundaries. Something like what the Pirkei Avot says, in a society where they say, Shali, Shalach, Shalach, Shali. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. That's confusion. That leads to a flood. But that's the ultimate of good. You know, there was, I remember, there's this concept of the rainbow festival or something, or the rainbow generation. And we had in the hippie generation this concept of just free love, you know, no boundaries. Just do whatever you want, wherever you want. I think now they have some crazy thing called the Isle or something, the Man Festival or something. I don't know what it is. Somebody once, I looked it up once. Burning Man. It's just kind of a let loose in the middle of the desert in Las Vegas someplace. But this concept, it sounds interesting, sounds nice, of just being limitless and boundaryless, just share the love. It's not, it doesn't start off as sounding as a flood should come and wash it out. It sounds noble in a way. But then again, remember, that limitlessness and lack of boundaries is ultimately a state of mayhem, a state of tohu vavohu, a state of total bedlam, and ultimately it becomes cruelty, because if I don't care for your possessions and you don't care for my possessions, then we have thievery, we have murder, because we're fighting over, we don't respect each other's possessions, each other's boundaries, and the whole world gets decayed, morally decayed, which is what happened at the time of the flood. So now what would you do if you came from a generation that was totally giving, loving, but to the extent that it led to total mayhem? What would be your initial reaction when you wanted to reconstruct the world? Let me take it to something more personal and something we can relate to. Imagine somebody has a child after waiting for so many years and so long. And because of the love, and the giving and the caring, they never tell them, no, or now it's time to go to sleep, or no, sorry, that belongs to somebody else. But they run after them the whole time. And if he takes something belongs to somebody else, he goes and he pays the other guy, just let him have it. And eventually, you know what happens with very rich kids that have not been disciplined properly. Unfortunately, where do they get their thrills? Very often, sadly, they will get their thrills by going to other substances that give them highs. And so we have In today's society, we have a problem, unfortunately, there's a problem called addiction, especially when it comes to drug addiction and so on. Sometimes that comes, sometimes, not blaming parents here, but sometimes part of what that comes from is because there were no boundaries. Children were not brought up with disciplines. They grew up being, again, that's a generalization. I say that can be one of the, now, what happens when a child, one of the ways to deal with addiction, with a child with addiction, is something called tough love, which seems to be counterintuitive. Sometimes a parent will be told by the counselor, the person helping them deal with this, you have to say that if you do not stop your habit, I'm sorry, you will not be allowed to come home to sleep. Now, that screeches against the feeling of compassion of a parent, but then the kid will be in the street. How can I let my kid be in the street? That's a very, 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 very scary thing, and that's true. But the only way to rebuild the child is to have now a very severe dose of restraint, of boundaries, of discipline. The only way to get that child back may be to, that moment of awakening may be the moment when he hears from his parent after he calls from being arrested. The parent said, I'm not coming to bail you out. You'll be released if you agree to go to rehab or you agree to go to whatever it is. I'm sorry, that's it. That moment may be the moment where the child will be able to rebuild itself and realize he's at the bottom of the tunnel. Sadly, some kids overdose before they get there. It's a very, very big tragedy. But there's a concept of discipline, of strictness that sometimes needs to come after the person has somehow been spoiled again. God forbid to say that children that fall into this are a product of the parents. I'd be the last person to say that. Not at all. But sometimes you can definitely find a correlation where the lack of discipline allowed the person the child almost to kind of predictably go into a certain behavior. But then the response to that will have to be an extreme move to the left, extreme move to discipline, to take matters back into your own hand. And sometimes the child has to hear a total cessation. So let's take this now to the story of Noah. Noah sees a generation that had no restraints. There was sorry, this you can't do. God said not. They didn't care about God. They didn't care about boundaries of humanity. They didn't care about boundaries of human relationships. They didn't even care about boundaries of species. For them, everything, and again, don't think of them as being these evil gorillas going and holding up people at gunpoint and taking their spouses and kidnapping them. They were just a society of total permissiveness. Maybe in today's recent generation, the 60s, smoke weed and hang out, walk around without clothes and just, just be whatever it will be. But that leads to a total decay, to a total moral sink into a morass, into a place which is totally bad. And God said, intolerable, only Noah remains. Now Noah, what's he going to do now to rebuild the world? So there's a part of him that says, let me start with strictness. Who's the strict one? The Oreb, the raven. So it's kind of you could say kind of a cosmic message he's giving. We're starting the world now on a higher, on a better note. It's going to be a world that is going to be with boundaries. We have to stop pulsating the love. We've got to come out with a strictness, with full of boundaries, full of restrictions. And that is symbolized by sending out the Oreb, the raven. However, then he goes and sends out the dove, because ultimately the raven doesn't go anywhere. You see, here's something very important about rules and restrictions, about Gevura in general. Gevura, those that know a little the Kabbalistic order, Gevura comes after Chesed. Chesed is kindness, is giving. Gevura is restraint. You can't restrain until you don't have the energy that's giving. When you have the energy of love, you can then tailor the love. You can then channel the love in a proper way. But you can't just start with strictness. And this is, we all know this in human relationships. You can't have a relationship just based on wagging your finger, just based on nose. As a matter of fact, in today's writings, they say, I don't remember the ratio, but for every time you want to tell off somebody and it should be effective, you need another 20 acts of love. I don't know if it's 5 to 20 or if it's 20-80. I don't remember what the rule is. But if you want in a relationship that your words of strictness, the words of Gevurah, your words of disciplinarian mode should have their effect, they need to be contrasted by 5, 6, 10 times. I don't remember how much. I have books that talk about it. Just common wisdom books. 10 times maybe as much. Because if the child, for example, if the child doesn't feel you love him, he tunes out. If he keeps on hearing no, he keeps on hearing discipline, he doesn't even hear it. Or the relationship with you will just be a negative one and it's not effective. There has to be a clear understanding that there's love there. That the child is loved, the person you're having relations with is loved, and your disciplinarian mode, your rules, your guidance is coming from a perspective of love, and it's coming to make sure that the love is moving in the right direction. Like King Solomon said, Chosech shifto soneh beno. Ultimately, spare the rod, spoil the child. But first there have to be beno. There needs to be a relationship with a child. A parent-child relationship is predicated on love. And then we say that love has to also be fashioned, that love has to be guided, that love has to be focused. Now take Adam, take Noach's son, take Noach. Again, he's living, he has to rebuild a world, restart a world which has gone awry. So he has this first notion to start it with Gevurah. But then that doesn't work. You see the raven just comes back, nothing happens. He sends out the dove, he sends out love. Because ultimately, while we need severity, we need the love as well. And in the analogy I gave you of the child, who's God forbid, a child who's gone off and become addicted or something, there needs to also at the same time be a feeling that the love is still there. But the tough love is coming because of love. At no time is it coming from cruelty. It's coming. There's one of the stories that has a very deep resonance in my heart. The story told of a teacher who had a child. He was in the shtetl, and he was a teacher of a group of kids. He taught them in a cheder. He taught them about how you have to have mercy on all of God's creatures. And he had a rambunctious son. And his son used to like cruelly dissecting, a little kid, cruelly dissecting creatures for fun. Ants and mosquitoes. And once his father, the teacher, saw him, he called him into his room and he said he got his only spanking in his life. His father took down Cain, as was 300 years ago. He gave him a spanking. And the kid was crying. Then he heard a strange sound. He heard his father crying from the next door. He went to see him. He saw his father sobbing. And he asked his father, why are you crying? He said his father was crying because it hurt him so much that he had a son that needed to be disciplined in a way that he had to actually hurt him. He knew he had to spank him. But that caused him so much pain. So what was the message that kid got? Was that together with discipline, the love was there in a very, very palpable, very special way. So they have to come together. So after a flood, it's difficult to be loving. Take, for example, in our generation, for me, it's already a little bit after my generation, but we've still seen people that went through a Holocaust. And people that went through a Holocaust, how can you emerge from a flood like that, a Holocaust, and engage in love and trust? How can you trust anybody? How can you trust the world? How can you trust anything? But then again, if you don't trust, how can you go through life? So I met somebody told me about his father who was a Holocaust survivor. And he was basically a basket case. He was not able to really coexist properly with people. In every synagogue he went, he basically had a fight. He became involved in he wasn't able to be. And this man told me, I understood that this was from the Holocaust, but recently I just got a piece of information that made me understand him even more. And this is what he tells me. I just found out that my father was in Kielce during the pogrom. Kielce is a place in Poland which had a terrible pogrom after the war. The Jews came back to different places in Poland to try and rebuild themselves, rebuild their Jewish life. There were several places in Poland where actually the remnants of maybe the army, AK, it was the army Krakow or something, there was the people, Polish resistance. There were still a huge amount of anti-Semitism in Poland. And so there was a horrible pogrom, I think it was 100 people were killed. That's when Jews knew they had to leave Poland. Basically that's when they knew they cannot rebuild them. But he said his father was hit over the head and needed to be hospitalized. So he said, I'm sure there was a physical trauma from the brain, perhaps some kind of brain damage. But besides that, there must have been an emotional trauma of having survived all this and then seeing that nobody cares anymore, even after going through the horrible camps and the thing. And still one isn't safe in one's own home. And so he said, I didn't know this till recently about my father. His father has long passed away. He said, now I understand my father in a different light, which I didn't understand before. So can you imagine coming out of that kind of environment and then somehow rebuilding after a flood? Somehow most of them were successful. They built families. The Judaism we have today, much of it, I grew up in Australia, much of it was rebuilt by Holocaust survivors. In America, much of it was rebuilt by Holocaust survivors. In Israel, it was a huge input from Holocaust survivors. In fact, we were able to go back and rebuild the world with a kind of a dove. This is symbolized by Noah. So we have to have, yes, there's the initial reaction that makes you send out a raven, perhaps more gevura, more contraction, more limitation, more strictness, more not cruelty, but the inability to understand how love can play a role again. But then ultimately, what he sends out is a dove, because ultimately, in order to rebuild, we need to be able to have love and trust. But we also need to have the raven. We can't have one without the other. If we are to go, I've had people that told me they were somehow emotionally abused by particular people. There's different kinds of abuse. Sometimes somebody can be emotionally abused by bullying or something. Actually, a colleague of mine told me that there was someone in his community who was bullying him in many different ways. Used to, whatever, the details are not relevant. So I told him, disengage. Just don't have anything. If the person needs a service or something, like any other community member, that's fine. But he used to give him a lot of extra attention and so on. I said, this man is clearly a bully. Disengage from that special relationship. So he would call me once in a while. This colleague still calls me and said, I feel bad. I know he wants more from me. So, giving has to be protected by gevura. Chesed has to be tempered with gevura. Giving has to be also have its limits. If it's limitless, you can be harmful to yourself as well. This is clearly, there's no question about it. In the old scenario, sometimes you don't see it. That scenario that he is in, clearly, his want to give has to be tempered by his need to discipline and to protect. And this is, we know this all the time. When a kid wants a knife, you can't give him a knife. You have to say no. That's kindness. Kindness is not to let him play with a knife. Kindness is to say no, and so on and so forth. So this really tells us, this really gives us a nice message. Excuse me. But let's see how we refer to Hashem here in text number 13. When listing the praises of the Holy One, blessed be He, Almighty God, it is written Hagadol. First it says the great, then it says Hagibor, the mighty. So what does the great mean and what does the mighty mean? So here we have the understanding that Hagadol refers to the attribute of chesed, kindness, because it's greatness, it's spreading unending unlimited life force into all worlds and created things. This life creates all being from nothing into something and allows them to exist through gratuitous kindness. The attribute of chesed is called gedula, greatness, for it comes from the greatness of the Holy One, blessed be He, in His glory. For God is great and His greatness is unsearchable. Because God is so great, He also injects lives and creates an unlimited number of worlds and creatures from nothing to something, for it is the nature of the beneficent to do good. But remember, Hagibor is the mighty from Gevura. There also needs to be the next attribute is the attribute of restraint, the attribute of discipline, the attribute of tzimtzum. So this is the overall message that we receive from the story of Noah. And ultimately, the way we are supposed to live our lives and to serve God and to be good, have good relationships with proper parents and so on, is by having a proper balance of chesed and gevurah, of giving and limits. And when one has an unhealthy balance, either of giving too much or of restraining too much, that can be a kind of a dysfunction, and very often is a source of dysfunction in a relationship. Sometimes you have the person that gives without taking into account that he's harming somebody else by his giving. Sometimes you have the reverse, the person who's thinking so much about themselves and about protecting their own limitations, protecting their own boundaries, protecting their own things, that they're harming themselves in another way by not being properly engaged and giving in the relationship or in society. Because what we need is a mixture of the two, and this is a nice illusion that we can take from the raven and the dove, and ultimately it needs to be the dove that leads the way, because only through kindness and giving can we have then the right blend, when we temper that, when we focus that in the right way. So we'll end with a blessing. May it be that perfect blend that we have, and may we all have a good week and a good year. Thank you.
Amen, amen.
That's the red button. The red button on the blocks. It's
The
going
red
to
one.
say stop broadcast. What did it say?
Yeah. Stop broadcast.
So move the
Yes.
black thing to yes.
Have a good week.